When Judge Judy tried to challenge Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett during a live legal panel, she thought she would expose a gap in her knowledge, but what happened instead surprised everyone watching and completely shifted the discussion. The cameras were rolling when the tension sparked in the room like a sudden electric shock. It was supposed to be a respectful legal panel, a special TV segment called Law, Order, and the Constitution Today, filmed before a live crowd at the Winspire Opera House in Dallas, Texas. The event organizers had flown in some of the biggest names in Lawan politics, but everyone knew who the main attraction was: Judge Judith Sheindlin, better known across America as Judge Judy. She needed no introduction. Her voice carried years of courtroom authority, and her stern expression alone could quiet a crowd. At 81, she was sharper than many people half her age, and she came prepared. Sitting 3 seats down from her, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and holding a steady expression, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The freshman lawmaker from Texas's 30th District had worked for years as a public defender before stepping into the political spotlight. She was younger, more reserved, but just as sure of herself. She sat composed, hands clasped, eyes steady. She was not there for show. She was there to tell the truth. The panel began with casual talk and polite comments. The moderator asked about the judiciary's place in modern politics, and each speaker delivered their usual polished answers until Judge Judy leaned forward. She looked at Jasmine the way a teacher sizes up a new student. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, her voice slicing through the air, "you talk a lot about justice reform, but tell me, how many felony cases have you personally tried in court? In real court, not the kind with news clips and press conferences." There were a few laughs, the nervous kind that sit between discomfort and curiosity. Jasmine did not flinch. "Quite a few," she replied, "including 3 capital murder trials and dozens involving unlawful searches, forced confessions, and juries that did not look like the people being judged." Judge Judy lifted an eyebrow. "Were you successful?" she asked. "I kept innocent people out of prison," Jasmine answered. "So yes, I was." That was not the reply Judy had been expecting. She leaned back for a moment, tapping her index finger against the arm of her chair. The moderator tried to move to a new question, but Judy was not ready to let it go. "Well," she continued, "it is easy to criticize the system, but I have found that people without decades in the courtroom often have plenty to say but little real weight behind it. I have been doing this longer than you have been alive. Law is not just theory, Congresswoman. It is habit. It is logic, not catchy phrases." The audience buzzed. A man in the front row even leaned forward as if he were watching a boxing match. But Jasmine remained calm. Her voice was steady. "With respect, Judge," she said, "I know the law because I have had to use it as a shield, not only as a tool. It is not just logic. It is lived reality. People do not fear theories. They fear what happens when the law forgets who it is meant to protect." That statement hit home. It was not dramatic, just solid. Judge Judy gave a small smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "Well," she said, "we will see how that experience stands up to real scrutiny." The moderator laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension, sensing that the spark between them had turned into a flame. He turned toward the audience, posing a question about Supreme Court decisions. But by then, all attention was locked on those 2 women. Yet Crockett was not done, and what she said next would turn the entire discussion upside down. You could almost feel the air shift. The live audience, filled with law students, journalists, academics, and some political enthusiasts, had gone from mild curiosity to full focus. Judge Judy had thrown the first blow. Crockett had dodged it with quiet skill, but everyone felt another moment was coming. The moderator, trying to steer the conversation, spoke up. "Let's discuss the 4th Amendment," he said, glancing between the 2 women with a hint of worry. "There has been a lot of talk about unlawful search and seizure, especially in communities that are often overlooked. Congresswoman Crockett, how do you believe the law should evolve?" Jasmine moved the microphone closer. "The law does not need to evolve. It needs to be followed," she said firmly. "The Constitution already bans illegal searches. The problem is making sure the rules are enforced, and making sure there are consequences when those rules are broken. That hit a nerve. There was a quiet change among the law students in the back. They leaned in, and phones started coming out discreetly. Someone was already streaming the moment live. But Judge Judy did not like that answer. She spoke up before the moderator could move on. With respect, she said in her practiced, calm tone, "You are making it sound like the justice system is set up to hurt people. That is not true. It is imperfect, but it is fair most of the time. When people run into legal trouble, it is usually because they broke the law." There it was, the assumption Jasmine had heard countless times. She gave a slight, nearly invisible smile. "Most of the time," Jasmine repeated. "But not always. I represented a 17-year-old in Little Rock who was stopped simply for walking too slowly down the street. They called it suspicious loitering. No drugs were found, no weapon either. Yet he spent 2 nights in jail because the arresting officer did not like the way he spoke." The audience shifted once more. "I also defended a woman whose apartment was searched after her neighbor gave the police the wrong unit number on a tip line. They discovered nothing but left her small child barefoot in the hallway while they tore apart her living room. She was too frightened to file a complaint." A soft wave of disbelief spread through the audience. Jasmine continued speaking. "You may think this is rare, but it is not. I have seen judges sign warrants while glancing at the clock. I have watched prosecutors treat being poor as if it proves guilt. I am not speaking from theory, Judge. I am speaking from 10 years of working with real people and seeing real consequences." Judge Judy narrowed her eyes slightly. "Do you believe the law can truly be fair?" "I believe the law is only as fair as the people who carry it out," Jasmine answered. "And I believe we talk about objectivity for more than we actually practice it." The room fell silent once again. For a moment, all that could be heard was the low hum of the lights above and the quiet clicking of someone's camera in the back row. A woman in the third row, a retired teacher from Abilene, leaned toward the man beside her and whispered, "She is not wrong." The man nodded. "I have never heard anyone say it like that on live television." Meanwhile, Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. She was thinking carefully. Her reputation was not just built on being sharp-minded. It was built on winning. She knew how to ask questions that threw people off balance. But there was something different about Jasmine's presence. It was not that she was there to win. It was that she did not feel the need to prove anything. That steady confidence was far harder to shake than loud arrogance. The moderator tried again. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you saying the system is broken?" She looked him straight in the eye. "I am saying the system was created by human beings, and, like people, it carries their biases unless we make sure it does not." But Judy was not ready to let the discussion end there. Because if she could not quiet Jasmine with pressure, she would try a different tactic. "Legal details." There was a stillness in the room after Jasmine's last words. "It carries their biases, unless we make sure it does not." Not spoken with anger, not performed for show, simply stated like a fact. And somehow, that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Judge Judy, without blinking, leaned forward again. Her tone was cooler now, more precise. "All right, Congresswoman," she said, "you clearly care deeply about this. But caring and accuracy are not the same thing. Let us get precise. Tell me, which federal case from your own experience best shows the point you just made about how enforcement fails to reflect the law?" The moderator paused, surprised by the question. A few people in the audience whispered among themselves. That was Judy's well-known tactic, putting someone on the spot in public with a question meant to reveal what they do not know. But Jasmine did not pause. "I will give you one," she said. "United States v. Jones, 565 U.S. 402, decided by the Supreme Court in 2012. Judge Judy looked a bit surprised. She had not expected Jasmine to come back with the citation including volume and page numbers. "In Jones," Jasmine went on, "the government placed a GPS tracker on a suspect's car without a valid warrant. They tracked his movements for 28 days. The D.C. Court of Appeals found it was an illegal search under the Fourth Amendment. The Supreme Court agreed." She turned slightly in her seat so she was facing Judy directly. But here's the part most people miss. The ruling did not only say the tracking was unlawful, It reminded law enforcement that any physical intrusion, no matter how small, cannot get around constitutional protections. She paused for a moment, just long enough for the crowd to absorb it. In courtrooms all over the country, we watch police overreach defended by so-called good faith, as though not knowing the law somehow becomes acceptable when the government breaks it. But Jones reminds us that technology does not erase our rights. It makes it even more important to protect them. By now, she had the entire audience focused on her words. Judge Judy's lips pressed together. It was clear she knew the case, but she had not expected Jasmine to know it in such detail, or to explain it so clearly on the spot and in front of a nationwide audience. Someone sitting in the legal podcast section at the back leaned over and whispered, "She came prepared." Jasmine was not finished. "I had a client in Texarkana," she added, "who was pulled over because his taillight was broken. No warrant, no probable cause. The officer claimed he smelled marijuana. They searched his car, tore it apart, found nothing, yet he missed 3 days of work and could not pay his rent. His children ate instant noodles for 2 weeks. You will not find that written in court documents, but it is real, and it happens every day." Judy's eyes narrowed. "And you're comparing that to Jones? That is a constitutional ruling, not a sad story." "I am connecting the two," Jasmine answered, "because rulings like Jones do not matter if the people they affect do not even know they have rights. Court decisions do not change lives unless someone stands up in that courtroom and says, 'This is what the Constitution promises,' and you cannot ignore it simply because someone is poor, afraid, or seen as an inconvenience." A round of applause began from the left side of the auditorium. It was not roaring, but it was genuine, and it grew louder. Judge Judy raised her hand slightly to quiet the audience. She smiled, but it was tight. "That is a fair interpretation," she said, "but the law is about balance. We cannot attack law enforcement every time they have to make a decision." "Not every time," Jasmine agreed, "but we can hold them responsible when those decisions ruin lives. That is not attacking them. That is the law doing what it is supposed to do." For a few seconds, the room seemed balanced between two voices, the legacy of a courtroom veteran and the rising strength of a new legal voice who had just gained respect not by yelling, but by knowing exactly where she stood and refusing to back down. But Judge Judy was not finished yet. If legal precedents would not shake Jasmine, then perhaps the realities of the courtroom might. So she shifted again, this time focusing on the practical side of how the law is practiced every day. Judy sat up straighter, brushing her sleeve as though clearing off dust. Her face stayed unreadable, but her quiet pause was louder than any question. For a moment, it seemed she was thinking through her next move. Then came her pivot. "All right," she said calmly, "let us leave theory and case law behind. Let us talk about real courtrooms. Tell me, Congresswoman, how many times have you had to handle a jury that was openly hostile? Have you ever stood alone, without any co-counsel, facing 12 people who already believed your client was guilty before you even said your first word?" Her tone was not sharp this time. It was slower, more thoughtful. It carried a hint of challenge, but also a test, the kind an experienced fighter gives a younger one, not to break them, but to find out if they belong. Jasmine did not flinch. "Yes," she said, "many times. One case comes to mind," she continued, "a young man in Garland accused of armed robbery. He had a public defender before me who hardly spoke to him. By the time I took over the case, the jury was already selected, and the story had already been set in their minds." She leaned forward slightly, not for drama, but because she was recalling it clearly. They looked at him. He was nothing more than a statistic. He had tattoos on his face. He wore second-hand clothes. But no one paused to ask why the surveillance video did not match the height of the man they arrested, or why the only eyewitness was someone who took a plea deal on a completely separate case. Now, the audience was fully engaged again. "So I stood up there," Jasmine went on, "and I told them, you do not have to like how he looks, but you have to be honest about the evidence. I walked them through each frame of the security video. I showed them how shadows can distort shapes. I cross-examined the officer until he admitted that he never checked out the alibi the young man gave during booking." She paused, and when the jury returned a verdict of not guilty, the judge said nothing. The jurors would not meet my eyes, but my client, he cried. Not because he was free, but because someone finally believed in him enough to fight for him. The audience stayed silent. You could hear someone shift in their seat 3 rows back. Judge Judy tapped her finger lightly against her chin. That is admirable, she said, but public defenders do not always have the time or resources to do that. No, Jasmine replied. We do not, but that is exactly the point. When the odds are stacked against you, and you still speak the truth, that is when the law matters most. She looked slowly around the room, meeting the eyes of several people who had remained quiet the whole time. I have seen prosecutors ignore evidence that could help some because it would slow down their schedules. I have watched judges roll their eyes when I ask for time to explain legal rights to a frightened teenager sitting alone. That is not justice. That is just a machine turn. A law professor from Southern Methodist University Thailand toward a student beside him and whispered, she is not giving a performance. She is telling the truth. Judge Judy shifted in her seat, her voice coming back gentler than before. And where is that young man now? Welding school in Waco, Jasmine said with a small smile. He sent me a photo when he got his first paycheck. That hit home. It was not about winning anymore, and the audience felt it. This was not just two lawyers debating each other. It was one woman saying, I have seen where the system fails, and I still believe it can work, and another, perhaps unexpectedly, finding quiet respect for that belief. Judge Judy did not jump back in immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of water, then gave a slight nod. It was not a nod of agreement, but a nod that said she heard Jasmine. It was the first real sign of change in her since the discussion had started. The moderator, noticing how the mood in the room had shifted, leaned back in his chair. We have talked about legal theories, courtroom practice, and gaps in the system, he said. Before we wrap up, is there anything either of you would like to add? Judy turned toward Jasmine. I may not agree with everything you have said, she told her, but you have earned your place on this stage. That much is clear. Jasmine did not boast. She only answered, I appreciate that. But while the live panel continued, cameras outside the hallway already picking up a different story. Clips from their exchange were starting to spread across social media, and people watching had plenty to say. By the time the panel finished and the audience began filing out of the Winspire Opera House, Jasmine Crockett's name was already trending online, not because of a slip-up, not because of some dramatic show, but for staying calm under pressure and for a rare moment when even Judge Judy herself stepped back, not out of defeat, but out of respect. Yet for many viewers who were now watching those clips flooding X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, one question kept popping up. Who is Jasmine Crockett, and where did she come from? To answer that question, you would have to look back a few years. Before Capitol Hill, before national interviews, before microphones and press badges, you would need to go back to a small two-room law office in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. It was not fancy. It shared a wall with a laundromat and had a vending machine that often kept people's dollars without giving them any sodas. But for Jasmine, that modest office meant everything. It was where she learned how to keep her focus in chaos, how to really listen, and most importantly, how to stand up and fight. Her first big case, there was not one she chose. It was given to her after another public defender walked away in the middle of a trial. A 15-year-old boy was accused of assaulting a security guard at a high school basketball game. Everyone had already written the boy off. No one wanted to handle it. Jerwo refused to speak above a whisper, but Jasmine did. She spent hours talking with him, not interrogating, just talking. Little by little, his story came out. The security guard had called him a name he could not even repeat without choking up. And when the boy tried to walk away, the guard slammed him to the ground and handcuffed him. No one else had looked at the surveillance video. Jasmine did, and it showed the guard push the boy first. That video did not just change the verdict. It changed how Jasmine practiced law forever. From then on, she promised herself, never assume the story ends with what is written in the police report. She became the type of lawyer other Public defenders went to for help, not because she was loud, but because she was willing to do the work nobody saw. The client home visit, the after-hours trips to the courthouse to pull files, the long phone calls with parents who had almost given up hope. But it took a toll. There were nights she slept in her car outside the courthouse because the drive home was too far, and court started early the next day. There were mornings when she showed up in the same clothes as the day before, hoping nobody would notice. Some people did, but the clients did not care because she kept showing up. Over time, her work began getting attention beyond Pine Bluff. After moving to Dallas and starting her own firm, she began handling civil rights cases, many dealing with wrongful arrests and illegal searches. She was not looking for headlines. She looked for trends. She noticed how often the same neighborhoods appeared in complaints, how certain judges almost never granted bond, and how some public defenders were handling more than 100 open cases at the same time. She carried those stories with her when she decided to run for office. People underestimated her then, too. They said she was too young, too direct, and not connected enough. Still, she went door to door across her district. She showed up at fish, fries, barbershops, and union meetings, not offering big promises, but simply saying, "This is who I am. This is what I have seen. I want to help fix it." She won. And even in Washington, she did not let the spotlight soften her resolve. She served on judiciary subcommittees, studied legislation in detail, and stood her ground when older lawmakers tried to push her out of conversation. She never forgot that kid in Pine Bluff, or the boy in Texarkana, or the woman with the child, left barefoot in the hallway. That is why, when she faced Judge Judy under the glare of live camera sand, a room full of doubters, she did not waver. Because she had already faced tougher rooms with no applause. No microphones, just a stack of case files and a client counting on her to speak up when they could not. But while Jasmine's past showed where her determination came from, the internet was only beginning to notice her present. And what happened next would start a national discussion that reached far beyond that Dallas stage. By the next morning, clips of the panel were everywhere online. A 37-second video of Jasmine explaining United States v. Jones had already reached 3 million views. People were not just sharing it, they were breaking it down. Some said it was a defining moment. Others called it a lucky break. But Judge Judy, she was not ready to label it anything yet. Not in public, at least. In private, though, she was not exactly happy. After the panel, in her dressing room, she was quiet. Not angry, just deep in thought. For decades, she had built her reputation on always being the sharpest voice in the room. And no one interrupted her. No one managed to outmaneuver her. So that moment of pause, when Jasmine had laid out her legal reasoning with both real experience and solid case law, stayed on her mind. The producers had invited both women back for a short post-panel talk, meant to air as bonus footage. It was not formal, just a short sit-down, supposed to feel relaxed and unscripted. But Judge Judy did not plan to be casual this time. She saw a chance and intended to use it. The cameras began recording again in a smaller studio down the hall. The setup was simple: 2 chairs, 1 camera, and a coffee table between them. No moderator, just the 2 of them talking. Judy turned to look at Jasmine. "So," she began, "we have talked about the Fourth Amendment, surveillance, and police practices. But let us switch topics. What is your opinion on courtroom decorum? Because to be honest, I see many young lawyers coming into court these days thinking that emotion can replace preparation." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking whether passion gets in the way of the law?" "I am asking whether it is professional," Judy replied. "The law is not therapy. A courtroom is not the place for social commentary." Jasmine gave a small nod. "It is not therapy," she agreed, "but it is still human. And justice is supposed to be about real people, not just case numbers. I have seen judges snap at defendants for crying during sentencing but smile when prosecutors misquote evidence. That is not decorum. That is imbalance." Judy tilted her head slightly. "You think emotion belongs in the courtroom?" "I think truth belongs there," Jasmine said. "And sometimes truth comes with emotion. I have given closing arguments holding a mother's eviction notice in one hand and a sheriff's order in the other. If you can read those documents and feel absolutely nothing, you are not impartial. You are numb." That was not the response Judy was hoping for. She leaned forward, her voice a little tighter now. "But you still have to respect the structure. The rules are there for a reason." "Course," Jasmine replied. "But sometimes the structure becomes a shield. I once had a judge tell me to watch my tone because I quoted a police transcript that used the word boy against my client. You know what that meant in that context." "We both do." There was a brief pause. Judy's face stayed unreadable, but her fingers lightly tapped on the coffee cup in front of her. "I remember that," Jasmine added almost casually. "That moment. The tone in the room. I remember thinking, if I stay silent, I am part of the problem. If I speak up, I am called emotional. So I chose to do both. I filed an official complaint, and I kept showing up." Judge Judy let out a quiet breath. "No," she said. "You are not what I expected, and you are not as rigid as I thought." Jasmine gave a soft smile in return. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, touching on topics like prosecutorial discretion, mandatory minimums, and how social media had changed courtroom storytelling. But the tension from earlier was different now. There was still plenty they did not agree on, but it no longer felt like a battle. It felt like two people on opposite sides of a divide, trying at least to understand how wide it really was. When the cameras stopped rolling, the producer gave a thumbs up. Judge Judy stood up first. She did not say a lot. She simply looked at Jasmine and said, "You are sharp. I will give you that. Appreciate that," Jasmine replied. "Coming from you, that matters." They shook hands. Not a handshake for the cameras, but a real one. Firm, silent, genuine respect. But outside that studio and the world beyond, the moment was already catching fire, and the reaction was bigger than any other woman in that room could have guessed. It began with a single tweet. A law student at UT Austin clipped the part of the panel where Jasmine broke down United States v. Jones and posted it with the caption, "Judge Judy tried to test Jasmine Crockett on federal law. Guess who left holding the mic?" Within an hour, the tweet had over 200,000 likes. By noon, the clip had been edited into TikToks, remixed on Instagram, and uploaded by big political commentary channels on YouTube. Some people shared it because they were shocked. Others reposted it with detailed breakdowns and legal opinions. But what truly made it go viral was not only the tension, it was Jasmine's calm, measured delivery, and that one sharp sentence that echoed across every social platform. Legal decisions do not change lives unless someone stands in that courtroom and says, "This is what the Constitution promises, and you cannot ignore it just because he is poor, or afraid, or an inconvenience." For every person who applauded her, there was someone else who said they had never heard a congresswoman speak like that before, without fancy words, without scripted talking points, just plain language and the scars of courtroom work. Soon came the think pieces. The Dallas Morning News ran a column titled, "Jasmine Crockett reminded us what the law is for." The Los Angeles Sentinel followed up with a story about her earlier cases, including interviews with two former clients who had never spoken to the press until then. One of them, now a father of 3 and working as a contractor in Fort Worth, said simply, "She saw me. I do not think people understand what that means when no one else does." By nightfall, cable news picked up the story. A CNN legal analyst called the exchange a watershed moment for how we view legal authority and the role of younger voices. Over on Fox, a host partly brushed her off as just another politician using courtroom stories to score political points, but even he had to admit, she knows her material. Meanwhile, Jasmine did not post anything. No tweet, no comment. She stayed silent on social media, not as part of a plan, but because she had a pile of emails from people in her district to answer, and a school board meeting in Oak Cliff the next day. But that silence only fueled the buzz. The public stepped into the space she left. Teachers shared the clip in government classes. Law professors built the exchange into their constitutional law lectures. A local bar association in Arizona invited her to deliver the keynote speech at a conference titled Grace Under Fire, Speaking Truth Without a Gavel. Then came Judge Judy's own reply. It was not a written statement. No press release, just a 5-minute phone interview with a radio host in San Diego who asked about the panel discussion. Judy did not walk back her views. She did not heap on praise. But she did say this: she is articulate, steady, and knows her case law better than many lawyers I have met at her age. I challenged her because I challenge people who think have something to prove. She did not back down. I respect that. The internet grabbed hold of it. Headlines claimed it was Judy softening or even endorsing Jasmine. But for people who actually watched the clip, it did not feel like surrender. It felt more like passing the torch, even if neither woman said those words out loud. One particular video stood out among all the noise. It was not from the main panel or the follow-up talk. It was filmed by a young woman sitting in the fourth row of the live audience, who recorded it on her phone and quietly posted it online. No editing, no caption, just unfiltered video and sound. In it, you could hear Jasmine speaking in a steady, clear voice as the audience listened, not to clap or argue, but to really hear what she was saying. Then, near the end, there was a small moment, a voice close to the camera, a woman probably in her late 50s, softly saying to no one in particular, "That girl's going to change something." I felt that. The comments under the clip blew up, and for the first time in a long while, a national conversation about legal work, public perception, and generational shifts was not fueled only by outrage or scandal. Instead, it was about someone showing what real expertise looks like when it is earned rather than given, and doing so without yelling. But while social media buzzed, Jasmine kept her focus, and what she chose to do next showed that this moment was not her peak. It was just the start of something more lasting. 2 days after the panel aired, Jasmine Crockett stood inside a simple community center in Duncanville, Texas, surrounded by folding chairs, church fans, and locals, mostly teachers, retirees, and working folks who were there for her monthly town hall. There were no reporters, no photographers, only a whiteboard behind her that said, "Know Your Rights," in faded blue marker. She barely brought up the panel. In fact, it was not until a retired bus driver raised his hand during the Q&A that it was even mentioned. "I saw you on that show with the TV judge," he said, grinning. "You handled her real good." There was some gentle laughter. Jasmine gave a polite smile. "It wasn't about handling anyone," she said. "It was about making sure the truth did not get buried by authority." Then she moved right back into her agenda, updating people on a new rental assistance bill, explaining how to apply for broadband help, and answering a question from a single mother about school zoning. Because that was how she operated, whether the spotlight was on her or not, her routine stayed the same. But the world around her had changed. That same morning, her office got over 800 emails from people across the country, mostly young lawyers, law students, and Black women who had seen the video and wanted to say thank you. One email stood out. It came from a civil rights attorney in Minnesota who wrote, "I have been in courtrooms for 22 years. You said what I've felt for 2 decades, but never had the platform to say out loud." Another message came from a high school senior in Omaha. "I want to study law because of you. You made it clear. You made it feel possible." Meanwhile, back in Washington, momentum was building. Jasmine got invited to speak at a legal equity summit in Phoenix, hosted by the American Bar Foundation. A state senator from Ohio requested a private meeting to talk about working together on a statewide sentencing reform effort. Even some Republicans quietly reached out, saying they respected the way she handled herself. Yet none of this seemed to make her change her pace. Instead of flying to New York for morning TV interviews, she kept her commitment to speak at a legal aid fundraiser in El Paso, something she had agreed to months before. The organizers had not expected a rising national figure to stick to the event, but Jasmine did not cancel. She stood at a podium in a room that smelled faintly of cafeteria pizza and floor polish, and told a story about her first eviction case, how the tenant had been too afraid to appear in court, and how the landlord's lawyer tried to win by default. She said she won that case not by raising her voice, not by shaming anyone, but by putting the right documents in front of the judge and letting the law speak for itself. "Real victories don't always look dramatic on camera," she told them that evening, "but they matter." Back in Dallas, Local reporters picked up on the viral buzz and tracked down some of her past clients for follow-up stories. Most of them declined to talk. One agreed, on condition that his name not be used. "She got me out when I was stuck. I didn't think she even remembered me," he told the reporter. "She looked me in the eye when no one else would. She could have just walked away, but she stayed." Meanwhile, Judge Judy went back to her normal studio work. No big statements. No follow-up special. She continued taping her new courtroom show, hearing cases, and delivering rulings. When a production assistant asked how she felt about all the media chatter, she reportedly shrugged and said, "The law is a long game. If Crockett keeps showing up, people will see." That was as close to an endorsement as anyone would likely get from her. But Jasmine did not need approval. She had already been invited to give a guest lecture at Texas Southern University's law school. She accepted, and when she stepped into that classroom full of first-year students a week later, she did not talk about viral clips or about Judge Judy. She began with, "Here's what happens when you don't object quickly enough during voir dire. Learn from my mistake." Because for Jasmine Crockett, credibility was never built on viral moments. It was built on showing up, again and again, responsibility, and remembering the reasons you began. Yet one final moment still stayed with her, a quiet exchange away from cameras that would tie the story together. It was nearly 2 weeks after the panel when Jasmine found a handwritten letter in the office mail. It was postmarked Stamford, Connecticut. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but the handwriting was familiar, neat, careful, traditional. Inside was one sheet of cream paper, no letterhead. "Congresswoman, that was one of the strongest courtroom arguments I have ever seen outside an actual trial. You were precise, steady, and above all right. You did not come to perform. You came prepared. That's rare these days. Do not waste time trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided you are not enough. Keep showing up anyway. The law needs more voices like yours. J.S.No big praise, no embellishments, just a simple recognition." Jasmine read it twice, then folded it gently and placed it in the back of her notebook, right behind a printed copy of United States v. Jones, which she still carried for workshops and community meetings. That letter did not change her. It did not have to, because the real message from everything that had happened, the viral clip, the online debates, the applause, even the quiet handshake with Judge Judy, had never been about who came out ahead. It was about how you hold on to the truth, even when the world expects something different. Jasmine had learned, long before any camera pointed her way, that you do not fight power by making noise. You fight it with clarity, with calm, with steady repetition, with patience, and sometimes with silence that says more than shouting ever could. It was never about putting someone on the spot on stage. It was not about chasing internet fame. It was about reminding people that the law does not belong only to judges or lawmakers or influencers. It belongs to the people. And when people truly understand it, when they see themselves reflected in it, they stop being afraid of it. That was what stayed with her. In interviews weeks later, when asked what she hoped the public took away from the panel, Jasmine would always give the same answer: "I hope they realize that knowing the law, truly knowing it, is not about sounding clever. It is about being helpful. Because if the people who need the law most cannot use it, then what good is it?" And those words spread for past Dallas. Community centers began inviting her to run legal basics workshops. Civil rights groups started sharing Jeezy to read summaries of constitutional protections, modeled after the style she had used during the panel. Several schools even reached out, wanting her to speak not about politics or Congress, but about how to argue with respect and evidence. Somewhere in all the online buzz, someone made a t-shirt with her words printed in big letters: "The law is only as impartial as the people who enforce it." Jasmine laughed when she saw it, not because the message was wrong, but because it felt unusual. After all these years, to see something she had once said quietly in a courtroom become a symbol people rallied around. But through all the noise, she kept her steady routine. She still answered calls from constituents personally every Friday morning, still turned up at committee meetings carrying a binder marked with highlighter lines, still drove herself to Saturday neighborhood cleanups in South Dallas, even if it meant wearing boots over her slacks. Because moments come and go, but consistency remains. And that was where her strength lay, not in going viral, but in being there when no one was watching to applaud. And speaking clearly when others perform. In treating a mother facing eviction with the same respect she would show a Supreme Court justice. The lesson was not about winning arguments. It was not even about changing opinions. It was about being steady enough to remind people what fairness looks like, especially when they had nearly forgotten. But before we wrap up, there is one more thing worth remembering. Because if stories like this matter to you, if hearing voices speak with honesty, courage, and clear purpose feels rare, then make sure you do not miss the next one. Weeks went by, and the online buzz shifted into something deeper, conversation. Not only about Jasmine Crockett or Judge Judy, but about how we define credibility, how we measure experience, and whether grace under pressure still has value in a world that thrives on conflict. For Jasmine, life did not turn into fame, it settled into something quieter, but more lasting: trust. Trust from strangers who watched the panel and saw someone who stayed calm under pressure. Trust from students who finally saw a legal mind who looked and spoke like someone they recognized. And trust from everyday people who had stopped believing their voices mattered, until someone reminded them that they do. She did not seek the spotlight. She simply kept bringing her work into the open. And that is the thing about moments like this: they are not the finish line of a journey. They are proof that someone has been walking forward with purpose all along. The lesson here is not complicated. It is not about who is louder, older, or more established. It is not about winning the internet or scoring political victories. It is about showing up with your full story, about using the weight of what you have lived through not to crush others, but to give your voice steady ground. It is about knowing that true authority does not need to yell. It simply needs to stand firm, because there will always be rooms where you are underestimated, conversations meant to throw you off, people waiting for you to make a mistake. But when you stand on the truth, when your experience is not borrowed or polished, but earned, no one can take that from you. So whether you are in a courtroom, a classroom, a boardroom, or simply trying to speak up in a meeting where it feels like your voice is ignored, remember what Jasmine showed that day. You do not have to fight loudly. You just have to fight wisely. And when someone questions if you belong at the table, do not argue, show them why you do, because clarity always breaks through. Now, if this story meant something to you, if it sparked a feeling, a memory, or a moment of reflection, do not let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story reminding you of what is possible when someone shows up prepared and steady. Share this video with someone who could use a reminder that staying calm does not mean staying silent. And most importantly, leave a comment. Tell us the last time you saw someone surprise a room, not by being the loudest voice, but by being ready. Your voice matters here. Let's keep the conversation going.